Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Supporting Children's Futures, Turning Child Support into College Savings. My name is Shira Markoff, and I'd like to welcome you to our conversation today. Before we start today's presentation, I'd like to begin with a few housekeeping items. If you're having trouble dialing in, you can listen through your computer using speakers or by connecting a headset to your computer. If you're having technical difficulties, such as trouble connecting to the visual portion of the webinar, send us an email and we'll send you the PowerPoint file as an attachment so that you can follow along. The email address is tmurphy@cfed.org. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to review it on demand. You'll receive a follow-up email in a week or two with details on how to access the recording. We'll also send a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that's being used today. Because of the large number of attendees on today's call, we have muted all of your phone lines to ensure sound quality. We encourage you to send questions at any time during the presentation by using the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel, as you see on your screen. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible after the presentation. Today's webinar is being presented jointly by CFED and the Assets and Opportunity Network. The Assets and Opportunity Network is a new national learning and advocacy community that answers the call for a more effective way to collaborate nationally, to learn and test better ways of expanding economic opportunity, and to build a more coordinated, effective constituency to advocate for policies at the local, state, and federal levels. For more information, you can visit our website at assetsandopportunity.org/network. We have a great lineup of speakers on our call today. Our first guest speaker is Christine Greco from the Child Support Division at the Office of the Texas Attorney General. Chris is going to be followed by Cynthia Osborne from the University of Texas at Austin, LBJ School's Child and Family Research Partnership. I'd also like to welcome Melissa Johnson from Kansas Child Support Services, as well as Ezra Levin from CFED. And finally, this is me. I'm Shira Markoff, also with CFED, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Our overall agenda for today's webinar is to demonstrate that child support can be an asset-building opportunity, especially around college savings. We're going to begin with a general discussion of the child support system and how that can connect with asset building. Then we're going to focus on how 2 states have made that connection through the Texas Child Support for College program and the Kansas Child Support Savings Initiative. Finally, we're going to wrap up with a discussion of opportunities for state policy advocates to replicate these efforts in their states. Before we move on with the call, we'd like to kind of get a sense of who's on the call and what your experience has been in working with the child support system. So we're going to launch a short poll that you're going to see on your screen. Please take a minute to answer it. Okay, we're going to close the poll at this time. So it looks like most people on the call are indicating that they either never work with the child support system or only occasionally work with the child support system. So it's great that we're getting a lot of people who are new to this area of work, and we're going to give you an introduction to that field and hopefully help you think of some new ways to work with the child support field. And some people were indicating we were having some technical difficulties before. I apologize if anybody was having any trouble hearing us. I think that we have them all resolved at this point. Great. So before we go into detail about the Texas and Kansas programs, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on why college savings are important. So we all know how important higher education is to an individual's financial success and future opportunities. But unfortunately, too many low-income students don't have the opportunity to go to and complete college. As the graph indicates, less than 10% of students from low-income families graduate from college by their mid-20s. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Some of them are ones that are well known to all of us. For example, skyrocketing higher education costs and gaps in financial aid. But some are perhaps less familiar to us. For example, there's a psychological impact that high tuition has on students, which makes them believe that higher education is not something that they can afford and that they'll be able to attain. In addition, there's also kind of a lack of user-friendly savings options for low and moderate income families who want to save for their children's education. For example, 529 programs that many states have too high of a minimum balance or too many fees for low-income families. So what these factors add up to is a troubling equation for low-income students. If you add up unaffordable tuition, gaps in financial aid, this belief that college is non-attainable, and the lack of savings incentives, what you end up with is a phenomenon called college will, which is a drop-off between expecting to go to college and actually getting to college. And research indicates that 45% of students from low-income families have a drop-off from expecting to go to college to actually enrolling in college. So what can we do to counter this effect? Well, savings are part of the answer. There are, of course, many other factors. There's academic support that kids need. There's also a need for more information on college options, and as well as information on how to fill out financial aid forms. But we do think that savings are a key piece of this higher education puzzle. So savings have two important effects. The first is the financial value, the actual value of the money saved in the accounts. But perhaps even more important is the asset effect, or the effect that they have on the aspirations of kids. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each of these factors. In terms of the financial value, we don't actually expect that low and moderate income families are going to be able to save enough to pay for their child's education. But we do think that it's possible with savings incentives to help narrow that unmet need for college-related expenses that aren't paid for by financial aid. In particular, we think that having some savings can help to lessen this summer melt effect of students who are intending to go to school and then don't make it there in the fall. And research has indicated that between 10 and 40% of college-intending students don't actually start school in the fall, with those rates being highest for low-income students. And sometimes it can be something small that prevents them from going there, not having the money for a plane ticket to get to school, or not having the money for a housing deposit. So those are areas where a small amount of money in a college savings account could make the difference. And I think even more importantly is this asset effect. So a low and moderate income student with an account dedicated to saving for college is more likely to get better grades and to graduate from high school, 3 times more likely to attend college, and 4 times more likely to graduate from college, even with only between $1 and $499 in the account. So it doesn't take a lot of money to have an impact. And basically what the evidence shows is going on is there's a psychological and aspirational aspect to having a children's savings account that makes children believe that they are going to go to college, that lifts the expectations of their family as well. And finally, I just wanted to mention there are also some other benefits of savings. They can help to start a habit of planning for the future and saving for the future at a young age with children. And it can also help kids build the kinds of skills and habits that they need in later life to pay off student loans, for example, or to save for a home. And finally, because many low-income families are also unbanked or underbanked, the saving in these accounts can be an opportunity to connect those families to mainstream financial products and services, which can help them in many other ways as well. So now at this point, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of children's savings account programs in that have been integrated into public systems. So there are a number of programs throughout the country. The most notable is the San Francisco Kindergarten to College program. There is also a new program starting in Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which provides seeded children's savings accounts with an initial deposit to every incoming kindergartner in the county. There are also efforts to integrate savings programs into social service programs, such as programs that are under design in Colorado with the Department of Human Services, and in the Puget Sound area in Washington, where 3 public housing authorities are working together to create a children's savings account initiative. But what we're going to focus in on today are efforts to connect children's savings to the child support system through in Texas through the Child Support for College program, and in Kansas through the Child Support Savings Initiative. So with that background, I'm going to turn it over to Christian Greco, who's going to talk a bit more about the opportunity to connect child support and college savings.
All right, thanks, Shira. So as Shira said, my name is Christian Greco. I'm with the Texas Attorney General's Office in the Child Support Division, and I oversee a federal demonstration project that's aimed at helping child support customers attain financial stability, and in many ways integrating some of the asset building concepts and practices that the field has been trying to use into child support here in Texas. Like 6 other states, my project is a part of a federal demonstration project where we're focusing primarily on trying to move non-custodial parents into individual development accounts. However, my grant was written in a way that I have some flexibility to work on other kinds of projects and initiatives, and this Child Support for College initiative is one of them. So next slide, please. So the poll showed that very few of you have any understanding of how child support works, so I'm going to spend the next 5 to 7 minutes giving you a brief but comprehensive understanding of how child support works and kind of how we think about it being very similar or in line with some of the goals of the asset building field. So child support is a federal and state program. It's established within Section 4D of the Social Security Act, and it empowers states to monitor and enforce compliance with family laws in every state that require both legal parents to provide financial support for their children. The services are funded through a federal-state agreement where the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement provides 66% of the funding, and the state then provides the remaining 34%. So all child support cases have a custodial parent and a non-custodial parent. And child support really is the way that the non-custodial parent pays the custodial parent for services and care that they provide to the child. State child support agencies offer a number of services, everything from establishing paternity, locating parents, opening and establishing child support cases through either administrative or judicial orders, enforcing these child support orders, facilitating the payment of the orders, facilitating the disbursement of the money, to the custodial parents and modifying cases to fit the changing needs of the family. In 1996, the child support system was tied to the TANF program when it was developed. Specifically, it was tied to the receipt of public benefits. So when a custodial parent applies for TANF or parent Medicaid, adult Medicaid, not Medicaid or CHIP for the child, the custodial parent must agree to open a child support case and to waive their rights to their child support payments while they receive public benefits. States have flexibility on how they define waive and how much they retain from the custodial or from the child support payment when the custodial parent waives these rights. So, for example, Texas allows the first $75 of a child support payment to go to the custodial parent while they're on public benefits. And then the $76 and plus the state retains. The idea there is that the state retains these funds to pay for the services that the custodial parent is receiving, that being the adult Medicaid or the TANF. State child support agencies have 5 major performance measures, and these are what the Federal Office of the Child Support Enforcement measure a state's ability and kind of success in, and it's also what the states use to drive their systems, because many of these performance measures are also tied not just to the 66-34% match from the feds and states, but it's also tied to extra incentive funding that the feds can provide. The performance measures include establishing paternity, meaning establishing a legal mother and father for each child born, cases with child support orders, so as the case is as a case comes in to be opened or is an order established on it, is a child support amount established and set up on the case, collections on current orders, collections on arrears, and the cost effectiveness of the program. And so all federally supported child support activities must point to these 5 measures. And how they point and how directly they point is something that's kind of in discussion and OCSC has been working on, but they must point to those 5 measures. So both of the child support or college savings programs that we're going to talk about revolve around the performance measure of the collection on arrears. And hold that thought. Next slide, please. So child support and asset building do have many common goals, and their goals really are kind of trying to focus on providing economic stability and success for families in the states. Where child support aims to move families kind of off of or away from the use of public benefits and towards financial self-sufficiency, asset building also tries to help move those families kind of by helping them attain some financial footing and moving towards success. There's also a great deal of potential for using a child support system. You know, thinking nationally, there's about $32 billion that moved through the system in fiscal year 2012. It's a lot of money. It's private dollars paid by one parent to another parent to provide support and security for the child. You know, if you take Texas as a small example, we have roughly 1.5 million cases, and we move about $4 billion through our system each year. This is roughly 20% of the population of the state of Texas, and 2/3 of those are either current or former TANF or Medicaid recipients, meaning they at one time needed public benefits when they came to or during their child support system. Therefore, there is some way to kind of tap a population that is really primed for kind of moving forward and attaining financial success through the child support system. So next slide, please. So I said both of these college savings account programs are based on the idea of arrears collections. However, to understand both of them and to understand kind of really what we mean by when it comes to arrears collections or arrears acclimation, you got to understand how, or the two types of arrears. So obviously, child support arrears accrue when a non-custodial parent fails to make their child support payments, right? But there's 2 different ways, I should say. So there's one way when a custodial parent is expecting their child support payment, the arrears that are owed are to them. So they're kind of on their own. They're not seeking public benefits, or they're not accessing any kind of public benefits. They are owed their arrears. In the sense, they own that debt. But when a custodial parent is receiving public benefits, either TANF or Medicaid, the arrears are owed to the state. because the state is the one that's retaining the child support payment while the custodial parent is using public benefits. And it's important to understand those two distinctions. So we have custodial parent owed arrears, also kind of known in the child support world as unassigned arrears, and state owed arrears, known in the child support world as assigned arrears, those assigned to the state. The Child Support for College program that Cynthia is going to talk about that happens here in Texas is built off the idea that custodial parents, when they receive a lump sum of their back pay of child support that's owed to them, they have a windfall moment, somewhat like what happens at tax time when somebody gets their refund. So they have extra money, and we can move people towards doing things that they wouldn't normally do, doing things like helping initiate that child savings account through that windfall moment. The Kansas program looks at the other side, looks at the non-custodial parent who owes money to the state because at some point in time the custodial parent was using public benefits and they weren't making their child support payments, and tries to figure out ways to incentivize the arrears payments through the use of these college savings accounts. Cynthia and Melissa are going to provide full details of the program, but this is an understanding of the two types of arrears and kind of generally how child support works, so you have an understanding of kind of where we're going with this. So Shira, back to you.
Thanks, Chris. So we're going to hear now from Cynthia Osborne, who is the Director of the Child and Family Research Partnership at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. So Cynthia, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Shira. And thanks so much for the opportunity to share this information today. I'm going to, as Chris said, provide a broad overview of the Child Support for College program, just completed here in Texas, as well as some of the findings we have from the program, so that we can start to learn what worked and what didn't. Go to the next slide. This was a really innovative program, as you can go to the next slide, designed to promote college savings among a population that had not generally been tapped into, the child support population, which, as Chris said, is predominantly a lower population who have told us via survey that they're very interested in saving college. And the Child Support for College program really stemmed from a conversation that occurred among a few of the stakeholders, learning about how child support and the asset building shared some common goals for their population, thought of an innovative way of putting it all together. And this is a public-private, nonprofit partnership that involved Citibank as the funding agent, and Raise Texas, which is a collaboration of lots of asset building organizations here in Texas, acted as a fiscal agent. The Office of the Attorney General, Child Support Division, acted as the marketer. They were the ones who have all the information about the families that may be receiving lump sums and so forth. And then in 3 different areas in Texas, a local nonprofit organization implemented the program, and one was in the rural area of the state, which was really important to see if there were differences. And then we here at the LBJ School acted as evaluator. Go to the next slide. I don't have enough time to go into all the details of the program. The slide, I provide a lot of additional information for those who are interested in looking at it, and there's more information in our final report. But just to say that initially the program in its initial design was quite complex, and these were modified over time. The idea was that when a child support customer received a lump sum payment, the OAG sent a letter or email or made a phone call to them to tell them about the Child Support for College program. And then that child support customer would contact the local nonprofit and inquire about the program, see if this was something that they wanted to do to begin saving for this college. 20% of their initial deposit into an account would be matched up to $400. They had to attend 3 financial coaching sessions. They had to put money in for about a month. And then over time, if they wanted to attend another financial coaching session, they could have additional money matched. The program was too complex, and over time, a lot of these barriers were removed and it was simplified. And the next slide shows you how we removed both the time constraints, the financial coaching requirements were now voluntary rather than mandatory. At the end of the program, the accounts were seeded with $100 matches 100% of all deposits up to a total of $500. And the major lesson learned, which is consistent with most of the asset building programs out there, that as the barriers were raised, that more accounts were opened. The next slide shows you the time trend of the cumulative opening of the accounts with the date here at the bottom, the month at the bottom. And you can see a big spike up around January, February, March of 2013. And this was both tax time, when more folks might be getting money to open an account with, but also it was at the time in which a lot of the changes taking place. From an evaluation perspective, it makes it very difficult to know what it is exactly about the program that worked, but we definitely know that the more that we took away the barriers for folks participating, the more safe. The next slide just gives you an overview of the number of people who actually participate. The top number there tells you the number of folks who actually inquired about the program, whoever called or emailed one of the 3 local nonprofits. And I'll provide more information in a second, but if we could change any number on this page, it would be that number, that we wish that more folks would have inquired about it, that we would have been more creative in the marketing or other ways to get people to inquire. But that's the number, that's the lower number. After that, you can see that a large portion of the folks who did inquire came into the program as participants, meaning that they came and met with one of the local nonprofits, they got some financial coaching, and they decided whether to open an account or not. The 63 of the 99 who came in actually ended up opening accounts. They deposited over $50,000, matched almost $40,000. So the next slide shows who it was that participated in the Child Support for College program. And the majority of folks who came in and opened it were women. Most of them were Hispanic, and they had higher levels of education and had completed their education goals than those who just inquired about the program originally or did not open an account. And the next slide really shows you the difference in income levels of those who opened accounts versus those who were interested but ended up not opening an account, or those who just inquired about the program. So this slide here shows you that about 18% of those who ended up opening accounts had incomes of $75,000. But I think it is important to note that although they were much more likely, account openers were more educated and had higher levels of income, they themselves were by and large not highly educated and did not have high levels of income. So I think that's important to keep in mind. The next slide sums up the kind of 3 areas that we looked at in terms of findings, asking some questions about participation and why people participate, the benefits that folks got out of participating, and then some of our key programmatic lessons. And I'm just going to take a minute to go through these. The first, which you can see on the next slide, is what I mentioned earlier, that if we could change any number, it would be the number of folks who inquired. So we sent over 38,000 letters or emails or postcards out, and that generated 300 inquiries. So that rate is very low. But once folks did inquire, as I said earlier, about a third decided to come in and learn more about the program, and those folks got some financial. And of those who came in more about 2/3 actually opened. So that was something that the program felt very proud of. The next slide shows you in a graphic form about how, by removing these barriers, we started to really see folks opening accounts quicker. The slide, the x-axis shows you the date in which folks inquired about the program, said, I want to learn more about it. And on the y-axis, it shows you the number of days from that date it took for them to actually open an account, if they did open an account. And as you move further in time, you can see that people are opening accounts on the same day or just about the same day, which they're inquiring about the program. And through our focus groups with participants, as well as this data and other data, it really is clear that the barriers, removal of the barriers, was what led folks to opening the accounts. However, it's not clear exactly which barrier it was that was the most important. The next slide shows you why participants opened an account. And if you recall, the main premise about the Child Support for College program, as Chris said, was that it was hoping to cash in or leverage this lump sum payment that child support customers would be receiving, that before they would use that money for something else, that they would think about using it to save for college, if they were a good fit, if they didn't need it for emergency care or for day-to-day living. It turned out that that lump sum payment was not a salient motivator for opening. This slide shows you that only about 25% said that that's really what motivated them to open. Focus groups, we heard again and again that they didn't receive a lump sum payment in the way that we thought that they did. It didn't seem that way to them, or they received very inconsistent child support, and so the lump sum was really enough thing for their own financial well-being. That the next slide shows you the reasons why folks didn't open an account, and the most common reason that folks cited was that they just didn't have enough money at the time. And another, almost 30% said that they weren't receiving child support consistently, and they weren't able to open an account at that time for those reasons. And there were fewer folks who mentioned about not understanding the program or not liking the 529 savings vehicle, which can be a pretty complex savings vehicle. We were worried that that might have scared some people away, but it turns out that that didn't seem to be the big impediment. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that we're asking, so what did people get out of participating in this program? And by and large, they began saving for college. That was, this is the first time for a lot of them that they began saving for college. This shows you the difference between our intake and our exit surveys. This is one of those things as an evaluator that you kind of, your head spins a little bit, because only 83% of those folks who opened a child savings account, college savings account, said that they're saving for their kids' college. So I'm not sure what that other 17% are doing, but it is true that more than double of those folks started saving for their kids' college. And as Shira pointed out earlier, if you go to the next slide, what the participants told us about the benefits of the program had more to do about the psychological benefits than about the dollar amount. But even folks who only put in $25, maybe had a seed with another $100 in that they still felt that they were giving their child an opportunity to go to college, that they, without this program, would not have been able to do it. In the subsequent slides, there are several different quotes, and we have even more in the report. I'm not going to take the time to read through them, but you really got this sense of talking with the participants about how important it was that they could send the message to their kids that they now have an account in their name that is going to let them go to college. And that was really important, and it was consistent with the other visitors about the important psychological benefits. If you Go forward to the next slide. It sums up some of the key programmatic lessons. What did we learn implementing this program? How would we do it differently? And one of the first things is that this program was launched very quickly, and there were multiple goals at the outset of increasing financial literacy, of opening accounts, people save enough money in their accounts, maintain the money in their accounts, and so forth. And with a more limited and narrow scope of goals, I think that that would help to define the approach of the program a bit more clearly. One of the most interesting things that we learned is what financial coaches can and cannot do. Through this program, we learned that financial coaches cannot provide guidance on opening these college savings accounts. They cannot steer folks into opening this, to provide information, all available college savings accounts. And some of the nonprofits were able to contract with financial advisors to help, but Raise Texas worked with its partners, really new rules being considered in Texas to better define and expand what financial coaches can do and cannot do in terms of helping people open accounts and save for college. And as I've mentioned several times, although the initial program design aligned with many of the best principles of asset building in mind, that we quickly realized that we had posed some pretty high barriers to opening. That the more simple that we created the program, the more likely it is that folks would participate. And this speaks a lot to, the last point speaks a lot to what Chris was talking about, those performance measures of the Child Support Division. That in order for this program to be sustainable, it needs to align well with all of the different stakeholders involved. And it did align well with Citibank, Raise Texas, and many of the nonprofits. However, with the Child Support Division, it didn't align with its performance metrics very well. And I know that Melissa is going to talk about the Kansas program, and that's a better example of how it may align well with what the state must do to meet its federal performance metrics, in addition to what it wants to do to help families. So I'm going to turn it back to Shira. Appreciate your time. This also gives you the link, if you'd like, for both our summary report and our final report, which will be up very shortly.
Thanks, Cynthia. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Johnson, who's from the Kansas Child Support Services, who's going to talk about the Child Support Savings Initiative in Kansas.
Thank you very much. Kansas started down the trail of thinking what we could do to help the children in Kansas, and also looking at some of those incentive numbers that they just had talked about. About 2 years ago, we started having conversations with our state treasurer's office, and you could go ahead and go to the next slide. And during the conversations with the state treasurer's office that administers the 529 accounts for the state of Kansas, we began having a discussion on what we could do to tie child savings accounts with the non-custodial parents so that they receive some type of an incentive on those arrears that have been assigned to the state. And in Kansas, we also have the arrears assigned to the state if the child was on TANF. Unlike Texas, there's no limit. It's all of it would be assigned for those months if they're on TANF. The child also, if Medicaid paid for the birth of the child, we had historically been getting birth judgments, so those were assigned to the state of Kansas. And also when the child would have been in foster care, any child support during that time would be assigned. So as you can see, we were dealing with children that have probably been in poverty for some, if not all, of their childhood. And the governor for Kansas had established a task force on reducing childhood poverty, and one of their findings was education is one route to get the children out of poverty. So if you could go to the next slide. In the initial discussions with the treasurer's office, they would only open up the 529 savings accounts with a $100 initial deposit. And that is just too high for the population that we're dealing with a lot of the time, especially when we get down in here, you're going to see some of the requirements that we have in order to participate. So we convinced the Treasurer's Office that we only would have to require an initial deposit of $25, and then every dollar that the non-custodial parent will deposit into the account, we will go in and adjust their arrears that are assigned to the state by $2. So they're going to receive a 2-for-1 adjustment off of what is owed towards the state of Kansas arrears. So you can move on to the next slide, please. One of the biggest problems we deal with a lot of times in child support is a non-custodial parent may be concerned about how the custodial parent is spending the money they pay, or the non-custodial parent doesn't want to pay the state. So we tried to build in a way for those problems being taken out of the equation in setting up these child savings accounts. The state of Kansas is listed as the account owner. However, all deposits are deposited and they can only be withdrawn by the beneficiary, which is the child. So the non-custodial parent can make a deposit and know that the custodial parent can't withdraw those funds. The non-custodial parent also can't withdraw the funds that he may have deposited into the account. So with the state of Kansas as the account owner, the child gets listed as the beneficiary, and the non-custodial parent gets listed as an interested party. The deposits, we had to define how we're going to set up the accounts, what happens if the child never goes to college, and we ended up just drawing a line that at the age of 25, if the child hasn't gone on to a higher education of some form, then they could go ahead and they could apply to withdraw the funds, and they're going to have to be responsible for any penalties that might be associated with that. Next slide, please. Some of those requirements that I mentioned a minute ago, we specifically are looking at some of our incentive measures in Kansas and how can we improve, and one of the incentive measures is current support, and then another also is payments towards arrears. In order to tie that into making these deposits, a non-custodial parent has to pay their current support obligation plus $1 in the same month that they make the deposit into the account. So if they owed $200 a month in child support for John Jr., they have to pay $201 in child support, and then anything above that would be deposited into the 529 account. We will automatically adjust the income withholding orders once they open up an account so that there's only $1 being withheld towards those arrears. So if before we were withholding $50 a month from their employment, from their income withholding, that will then give them that money they could put into the deposit account. If the child is, if the arrears are only arrears only case, then they only have to pay $1 each month into the deposit into the savings account. Oftentimes we see that sometimes in the case where it was a child support foster care case, and the child's now back home, but there's still arrears that were due and owing for when the child was out of the home. So that's often how we have the arrears-only cases. We've limited our area of who we targeted initially to be cases where only arrears are owed to the state of Kansas. So right now in this infancy, we just started this in June, we have only targeted the individuals where there's arrears entirely to the state. There's not any arrears also owed to the custodial parent. So as they open the account and make their deposits, we don't care who makes the deposit. If a grandparent wants to help out the non-custodial parent and also save for their child, their grandchild, they can go ahead and make the deposits. We give the payment vouchers to the non-custodial parent, and whoever he wants to pass those along to make the deposits, we're not worried about. But we would still give the reduction in the state arrears as long as the current support plus $1 or just $1 towards arrears only cases is paid. We would like to be able to have the contributions come directly withdrawn from a paycheck and automatically go, but at this point, since the state of Kansas is the account owner, we're unable to do that. So the non-custodial parent does have to manually make the payment, either by check or money order, and mail it into the Learning Quest account. Next slide, please. So we started June 19th. We are very much in the infancy of the program. At that time, we had identified 6,656 non-custodial parents Kansas has a caseload of about 132,000 cases, so those were the only ones that we identified where the child was still a minor and all the arrears were owed to the state of Kansas. So out of those 6,600 cases, as of last week, we had 82 inquiries about it. 18 applications had been received, but we had opened 17 accounts. So we go in, then quarterly, we receive a notice of what deposits have been made, and we verify just by looking on our payment system that they met the requirements for making their accounts, and then we'll do the adjustments. So I don't have any reports since the end of September as to how much state arrears have been removed because we only look at it quarterly. So at the end of December, we'll go in and look up all the cases and make sure we have the right amounts and that they met the requirements and make the adjustments then at the end of December. Next slide, please. And the non-custodial parent, or even whoever makes the deposits for the non-custodial parent, can receive benefits as far as tax benefits when they file their income taxes. And obviously, they're helping to contribute to the youth. You know, we discussed a little earlier about the impact to a child when they have a savings account in their name. But child support, one of our facets, isn't just collecting as much money as we can. We're also looking more towards what we can do to help the family and the family unit. And the effects of for a child to not only have that account to go to college, but know that that account was set aside for them by a non-custodial parent, we think has to have a high impact on the child to know that that individual is thinking of me and setting aside the money for me. We have received recently a $50,000 grant, and we're planning to expand the program so that we can offer it to cases that also have custodial parent owed arrears and state arrears. We're going to be starting some campaigning to target all of the audiences in Kansas so that we can try to increase the program. But as we just got things started and began running, we kept it as a small group just so we can get the flow of it and see how everything works. Once the account is open, we simply give payment vouchers to the non-custodial parent and they make their deposits. The non-custodial parent can call in to Learning Quest every year if they want to change the investment portfolio. We have no part in that. When it's time to withdraw any funds, there's a form that the child, the beneficiary, would fill out, and then it comes to our office simply to sign off that, yes, they have an account and it was with us, and then it gets sent on to the Learning Quest to handle everything. Learning Quest is very much the one that handles the applications and the withdrawals and any change requests for any investment information. Next slide, please. And I provided here, this is just our website for where we have all the descriptions and forms for it. This 888, this toll-free number that I've listed, I had hoped would be up and running as of today. It's not technically up and running in the location where it needs to be. We have one person that handles most of these inquiries, and her name is Sarah, and I can give you the phone number direct for Sarah. If anyone has any inquiries, they can contact Sarah directly. And her number is 913-210-7001, and her extension is 7093. Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Thanks, Melissa. Just wanted to remind you guys that if you have any questions, you can submit them in the question box on your GoToWebinar panel. We have some questions coming in, and we're going to address them at the end of the presentation. So we have one last presenter. We have Ezra Levin, who is the Federal Affairs Manager here at CFED, who's going to be talking a bit about some policy opportunities.
Great. Thank you, Shira, and thank you so much to Cynthia, Melissa, and Chris. I hope everybody on the line has just become inspired and is looking forward to advocating for these types of programs in their own states. It's worth noting, before I jump off into some policy opportunities, that in 2012 there were $114 billion in arrears nationwide. So that's not to say that all of that money could go to a CSA, but there's an opportunity there. And when you're thinking about advocacy both at the state and federal level, it's worth noting the number of dollars that are out there to support these efforts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both state and federal advocacy opportunities. The first two really focused on what you can do at the state level. The second two, it would be a joint effort of state and federal governments in order to support these efforts. So I'll go first starting with the simplest option, which is splitting the payment. Now this is, I know a lot of the folks on the line don't have a lot of experience with the child support system, but you probably have experience with the asset building field. And I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the efforts at the federal and state levels to split tax refunds so that folks can deposit it into different accounts, things like IRAs or CSAs, 529s. The fight here would be similar, to allow these payments to be split so that they're not just going to a single account as they currently are when a non-custodial parent makes a payment, but could go into a CSA savings account, a 529, or a different account. Now, the idea behind this is similar to the idea behind the tax refund. It's tapping into some of the principles of behavioral economics that shows us when folks are receiving these payments, if you can set them up on an automatic schedule, they're more likely to invest and they're more likely to save more. The great thing about this program is that there would be no federal action necessary. We don't need to get Congress to act. We don't need to get Department of Health and Human Services to act. A state could do this on its own. And the other positive benefit is there aren't costs associated with this directly. There aren't costs like matching. There aren't costs like seeding the accounts. Now, if you're looking at doing this on a state level, it's worth keeping in mind that there are going to be other technical issues, but none of these are insurmountable. Now, there's an issue around recoupment currently. Of course, if a state is looking to recoup payments that were made to a custodial parent, they only have to look into one account. If this is split between multiple accounts, suddenly they've got to look at more than one. There could be some costs associated with that, but again, this is not insurmountable. What's lacking here is political will. So if there is an advocacy effort around this, this is certainly a relatively light lift that could be done in order to support these accounts. Now, on a little bit of the heavier lift side, let's take a look at the state incentive payments. And I know that Chris talked a little bit about these. In fiscal year 2012, countrywide, there were $450 million in state incentive payments. So these are payments made by the federal government to the states because they perform up to a certain level, qualify for these funds. And these funds that the states receive have to be reinvested either into their child support enforcement systems or into related activities. And related activities is a very broad category. So there's actually a lot of opportunity for these funds to be used to support efforts like the type that are going into the Kansas system or into the Texas system. The easier one of these options would be to just simply offset the costs that the state incurs in order to set up the infrastructure for CSAs. So this is really just the one-time cost associated with creating the program. That would be easier, but not the only option. Another option would be to use these funds, which are annual funds, to support both a seed and a match when setting up these programs at the state and federal, or at the beginning and on an ongoing basis. Now, again, like the splitting the payment option, this is a state reform that does not require any federal action. You do not need to work with Congress or the executive branch to do this. State-level advocacy can accomplish this. And $450 million nationwide is a big pot of funds, so it's certainly worth looking at. Now I'm going to move on to an effort that would be best done at the state and federal level. Again, I think Chris talked a little bit about this earlier. One of the ways that the child support system gets funds from non-custodial parents is by intercepting tax refunds. And this is the source of many of the lump sum payments that are made, for instance, in the Texas system. To give you a sense of the size of this, $2.2 billion in tax offsets are made. Oh, wait. Okay, we're great on this. Perfect. $2.2 billion in tax offset payments were made in 2012. Now, that it's a sizable percentage. The largest source of funding for the system was in income withholding, which was about 10 times that. It was about $22.9 billion. But still, the second largest is this tax offset. So it's a sizable percentage of funds. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is that these funds have to be used to pay down TANF spending or go into arrears. And this actually dissuades many folks from many non-custodial parents from filing their taxes. So options at the state and federal level, it's really best for state advocates if they tackle this at both levels, because the majority of the payments that are going to pay off TANF dollars are actually going to the federal government. So although the state governments can unilaterally decide any dollars that we recoup from intercepting these tax refunds are actually going to go into CSAs, that's not going to be the majority of these dollars. So just that's one thing to keep in mind. A waiver from the federal government would allow a joint effort, something that would allow all of these funds to go through. But again, it is a heavier lift because it would require a hand-in-hand effort. And then the last one I want to talk about is disbursements for youth and foster care. Now, to give you a sense of the size, disbursements for youth and foster care. Oh, no, I skipped. We're going to go, right? Yeah, perfect. I'm sorry. We've got a lot of papers here. And I will note it's tough to make a joke when you're on a one-way line with 165 people, but I'm just going to assume you're all laughing appreciatively. So now, on the last slide, disbursements for youth and foster care. To give you a sense of the size of these, we have about $2 billion in both TANF and foster payments combined. That's in fiscal year 2009. Now, the federal government does not collect annual data on how much is going in collections for just foster care payments. But back in 2003, that number was about 0.4%. So if we just back into the number, we can extrapolate that roughly in 2012, when total collections were $31.5 billion, that the payments for foster care were ballpark around $125 million, and that's nationwide. So it is a sizable amount of the payments, and so there is a lot of opportunity here to set up CSAs specifically for the foster care population. And one of the reasons why this is such an attractive option is actually because disbursements made through this program are actually made only to the states and the federal government. So if you're a non-custodial parent with a child in the foster care system and you make payments into the system, it's not going directly to the child and it's not going directly to the custodial parent. It's going to the federal and state governments, which means these payments are much less attractive for non-custodial parents. So this is an opportunity to bring these parents into the fold, to get them to start supporting their kids directly by saying, these payments that you make are not going to go directly to reimbursing the state or federal governments. They're going to go to a child savings account that's going to enable your kid to go to college years from now. Now, again, the majority of these payments, when they go to reimburse the government, are actually going to the federal government, not the state government. So like the tax interception reforms, this would be a proposal best pursued hand-in-hand with a federal government waiver and state-level advocacy. Because without that, even if states act unilaterally, they're not going to be able to redirect the majority of these funds to their program, because the majority would be going to the federal government. Now, I'm going to stop there, and I'm looking forward to discussing all your questions. I would encourage you to keep on sending them in, and we're going to get to the discussion.
Great. So as Ezra said, this is the opportunity for you to submit your questions. So again, you can submit them in the question box, and we'll answer as many of them as we can. So I just actually wanted to start with a question to both to Chris and Melissa about, what do you think were the factors in your states, or what about the political climate in your state made these kinds of programs possible? So I guess we'll start with Chris.
Political factors. I think one of the things that made this possible in my state is the creative way in which myself and others here in the Child Support Division with our partners both City and Raise Texas were able to kind of build off each other's strengths and abilities. Texas Child Support Division, the Attorney General's office, does not receive private funds from anybody. So when City approached Raise Texas and I about their interest in trying to kind of seed this project, I had to say we can't do it initially because we can't receive private dollars. Because in many ways, the Attorney General's office has some kind of regulatory authority over City and other. So we had to kind of build off each other's strengths and use to make it work. So without Raise Texas being our fiscal agent, we wouldn't have been able to do this. So that's kind of where the Texas idea came from.
Great, Melissa, do you want to add something?
That mute button gets you every time. As I mentioned during the presentation, our governor in Kansas already had a task force on reducing childhood poverty. So that was a good jump start in that we already had a governor that was trying to find ways and means that we can do this. It doesn't require the appropriation of necessarily using state tax money. This is arrears and debt owed to the state of Kansas, but we don't know for sure if we'll ever be able to collect or when we'll get it collected. So I think both of those things played into it, and then we have a director for the child support program that's very innovative and forward-thinking on ways that we can meet the governor's goals and also look at our incentive measures.
Thanks. I have a question for, or two questions here for Cynthia. A couple of people were asking about the minimum amount required to open accounts, and also how were you able to monitor the savings balance in people's accounts in order to match their funds?
So the minimum amount required is $25, and that was established by the Texas Comptroller's Office. That's a requirement of the 529. And so that wasn't a requirement of the program per se. And in terms of tracking the accounts, they would, it was somewhat complex, which if we were going to take this to scale would have to be thought through more carefully. But we would get copies of their deposit slips or their account slips, and then can go through and document what they were owed, what their initial deposit was, what additional deposits they had made, and then match that anywhere up to $500.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I guess this question probably is to Chris and maybe also to Melissa about how can nonprofits approach state officials to partner on initiatives like this? Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first of all, understanding kind of the performance measures and what drives the child support system is key, because we, as the Child Support Division, are always looking for ways to improve our performance measures. All of our activities have to, like I said, point to them. So if you can give us a sense of what it is you want to do and how that helps point to our performance measures and increases our performance measures, then we're likely to listen. I also should say that, you know, many child support divisions have these little 1115 waiver programs. I'm funded under a waiver program, and it gives some flexibility for states to do things. So I would try to figure out if your state has that, and if they do, talk to the staff who oversee those waiver programs, because they're able to expand what they do beyond just the clearly defined activities that point to the performance measures. And that might, you know, get your foot in the door and help you.
Melissa, do you have anything you wanted to add from your experience?
Basically, you know, contact that we've had from nonprofits has either come direct to the director for child support in Kansas, or oftentimes the nonprofits that we've dealt with have been in touch with our federal representatives at the OCSE, who have routed them to us because they know what each state's current upcoming initiatives and items are and what might be good fits. So oftentimes I think the local, the OCSE representative for the region that you're looking at is often helpful.
Thank you. A question here for Cynthia. Were you able to tease out any information regarding the difference in the experience of low-income families versus moderate or higher-income families in the program?
That's a really good question. One of the things that we were able to determine is that our lower-income families were the ones who were more likely to enroll when the barriers were lower. So we know that folks who enrolled initially generally had some sort of savings already, perhaps in a CD or in a savings account that they thought it was a good idea to open a 529 account with. Lower income families were less likely to have those assets and less likely to be able to come up with those initial deposits that were initially at the beginning of the program were quite high in order to reach the full maximum. We also have heard different things from our focus group participants or child support recipients about how they use their child support dollars or how frequently they get their child support dollars. So our very low-income families are generally not receiving child support, hardly ever. If they do, it's very irregular. Some of our higher-income families have, or moderate-income families, receive child support on a more regular basis, not all the time, but on a more regular basis. And their practice has been, to the extent that they can, to put those dollars away for the child specifically. So this was a different avenue for which they could start to put those dollars away, something that was determined for going to college. So there was different behaviors about how they both receive child support and what they've been doing with the child support that they have been receiving. I think those are probably the largest differences, not to mention just the amount that they can deposit and the frequency in which they deposit.
Thanks, Cynthia. I guess this question probably Chris or Cynthia or Melissa, you could probably all answer this question a little bit. So do you engage non-custodial parents or custodial parents in financial literacy training? I guess actually, why don't we start with Melissa on this question?
We don't, as the Child Support Services Unit for Kansas, do that. There are other programs in Kansas that do have financial education components to them, and we offer, for a lot of those programs, or some of them, we offer an incentive that if our individuals attend, we will reduce state arrears by X amount for their attendance, and it just depends on the entity. If we're aware of the entity that's doing the financial education courses and they want to work with us, then we have agreed to reduce state arrears for that, but we don't ourselves put anything on.
So Cynthia or Chris, do you want to talk about what you do in Texas?
Sure. In Texas, the program was geared more towards the custodial parents than the non-custodial parents because the money is owed to the custodial parent, and that was who had the right to decide where it went. That was the thinking initially. And the financial coaching was an integral part of the whole program for the custodial parents. And there wasn't much focus on the non-custodial parents. I believe if we had to do it all over again, we would try to involve the non-custodial parents in a different way and perhaps provide financial coaching for them as well. The financial coaching, though, wasn't taken up by our custodial parents even in the way that we anticipated. Most folks who participated in the program participated in one, there was a financial coaching session, and then there was another group who participated in two, and some who had to participate in all four because they started at the very beginning of the program. But they didn't get from the financial coaching sessions kind of everything that we were hoping that they would. Those were not as relevant to them as we were hoping that they would be. And it was they didn't have enough time really in their day to do the financial coaching, and that was really a barrier for them. Chris, do you have things to add on that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, kind of speaking from child support, you know, our child support officers, who are kind of our frontline staff who work with all of our customers, they're not. We don't necessarily consider them social workers. They are case managers, for lack of a better term, or kind of in a colloquial way, but they are case managers for 7,000 cases. So they don't work with the families to help them make child support payments. We set an order and let it go. And if we don't hear from the family again, that kind of is our assumption that everything is fine. So there's an opportunity to build off of our touch with them to look at financial coaching, and I think it would be appropriate to say that many of our child support officers believe that our customers need some kind of financial coaching or financial education, but we as a system don't provide it. I should say, though, we are trying in another initiative that I oversee to move non-custodial parents towards VITA programs that have financial coaching and financial management services, with the notion that they can go and file for free if they don't file, as Ezra and several folks were talking about. Many of them don't file because they'll have their tax refund intercepted because they owe child support. So we're trying to move them towards that so they can file and get into financial management services that way.
Thanks, Chris. I have a question for Ezra about, can you provide some resources or websites where people can obtain more information on federal figures on child support arrears and disbursements?
Yes, I can. There's a lot of great information out there. Really, HHS, Health and Human Services, puts out a lot of good data, drilling down both to states, but also providing kind of federal level data on where the funding comes from, how much the arrears are. It's great information. And so if you go to ACF, that's in Administration for Children and Families, .hhs.gov, you can navigate to the Office of Child Support Enforcement. But also, we're going to follow up with this webinar with some information on where you can get all this data. There's also a few reports by the Congressional Research Service out there that look at the issue in a few different ways, but we'll be sure to follow up so you have the sources for all that.
Great, thanks. So I think we have time for just one or two more questions. So if you have a last burning question that you want to submit now, please go ahead. We also, as Ezra said, we're going to follow up. So if there are things that we didn't get to, we can always send that information out later. So this question is really for Melissa. What barriers have you identified for non-custodial parents participating in this program or being successful contributors to the account?
You know, it's only been a few months, so I'm not sure that we've identified the barriers yet, other than, you know, our response wasn't very high. It was a little over 1%, which we didn't expect it to be terribly high. I just think that one of their biggest barriers is there's a lot of non-custodial parents that don't meet the requirements to have paid their current child support during the month. But that's not something that we're willing to wiggle on, because the custodial parent deserves to have a reliable current child support amount coming into their household every month. So we're working to try and make sure that that would meet that they would be able to do it. We've also tried to keep those individuals in the program. So if you miss 1 month, we don't kick you out. We understand that you may have car troubles this month and have to buy parts, so you can't make the enough for a deposit this month. So it's very much tailored to whatever the individuals are able to make. But as we're going, we have not yet probably identified some of the barriers that are out there. A lot of it is, I think we may need to do more outreach. Literally, all we've done is sent one letter. And we have a little bit of a blurb about it on our website. So I think outreach will be beneficial to growing the program.
Okay, Thanks, Melissa. I guess just one more question also for you, Melissa, about, you mentioned about the $50,000 award that you received. Can you just talk a little bit more about what your plans are for using that to enhance the program?
The plans with that include, right now, all of our materials are in English only. And so we plan to use some of those funds to get all of the materials and the outreach also translated into Spanish. Additionally, I think we'll use some of the funds a lot for the outreach that we need to do. I anticipate that we'll be having some campaigns in the radios and on the new TV. So a lot of that will probably go to outreach so that we can reach more people. As we move forward and start including cases where there are arrears owed to the custodial parent, we very much want to have the custodial parents buy in. Because if we reduce that arrears payment to $1, that may lessen the amount of money that came into that household that month. So we need to make sure that the outreach is out there and that we're having the communication with the custodial parent, and some of those funds will be used for that outreach.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. So we're going to end it there. If there are any other additional questions that were not answered, I'm going to provide the contact information for all of the speakers on today's webinar, so you can reach out to those people and ask them any other questions you have. In addition, we're going to be sending out the PowerPoint and the link to the recording of the webinar within about a week or two, so you can go back and take a look at any of the information or click directly on any of the links that are in the PowerPoint. So thank you, everyone, for participating in the webinar today, and have a good afternoon. Oh, sorry, 1 minute, I forgot. We do have actually a poll for you just to kind of rate the webinar before, if you can just quickly answer that before you go. Thanks so much.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.